So what do you do when you're trying to sell a property and every time somebody goes out to look at it, one of the neighbors comes over and annoys them and tells them all the reasons they don't want to buy it? That's what happened with this property, and I'm going to show you how I got around it. And I'm also going to show you a couple other mistakes that I made. This property was in an established neighborhood and it was kind of odd shaped. So it had this long, narrow driveway area, and then it broke up into a larger property. I was offering, it was kind of in the beginning, it was my first big purchase. I was offering $9,800 for the property. But there were some interesting things on the county website that made me a little hesitant. Number one was the odd shape. Number two was that it was in a flood zone. But most of this neighborhood was in a flood zone, so I figured it's gotta be buildable. So I called the county, they said it was buildable. So I decided to go out and look at it. And so I went out and looked, and it was full of like bamboo, and it was overgrown in trees and stuff like that. So I knew that it might be a hard sell, but just based on the property value, I knew that I could flip it. The guy that I was buying it from had moved, him and his wife were gonna build there. I think his wife had passed away, he had moved out of state, and he just wanted to get rid of it. So he sold it to me for $9,800. Once I bought it, I went out to take some more pictures. Now this was before I did drone pictures, but I went out and took some regular pictures. And if I could do it again, I probably would have got drone pictures. I think I would have sold it even faster. But I get out there and I'm driving, and it was a dead end road. So I'm driving slowly, looking for the driveway because it was in between two other driveways. And this neighbor comes out and he sees me and he's like, "Hey, what are you doing here?" Now, I'd already looked at the property. The way this property was set up, there was a property here and a property here, and both of them had long driveways on the side that kind of went around those properties. And there was a property here that was vacant and a property here that was vacant. These two were houses, these were vacant lots. The guy that came to talk to me lived here, and I said, "Yeah, I'm just looking for a property that I saw out here." And he's like, "Oh, no, there's no property out here for sale." And of course, I had already closed on it. So I'm like, okay. I said, "Well, do you know who owns the property?" He's like, "Oh yeah, there's two properties. I own them both. They're not for sale." And I was like, okay. So I just kind of smiled, like I didn't want to deal with this guy. I knew that I already owned the property. So I drove around. I stopped and took some pictures. Another neighbor came out and started complaining to me. It was the one right next door. And I told her that I had bought it and I was going to sell it and this, that, and the other. And they're like, "Well, I'll buy it from you." And of course, they only wanted to give me like $10,000, $12,000. And I told them my price because I was going to list it for $30,000 or $35,000. And they're like, "Oh, you're never going to sell it for that much. There's no way. It's not worth that much. It needs all this work. Oh, and by the way, I don't appreciate you being out here." And, you know, they were just giving me a hard time. And I was like, whatever. I took some pictures. I left. I came back later, put a sign up on it, which I don't think lasted very long. Interestingly, then a hurricane came through and the neighbor called me and she's complaining to me that one of the trees on the property is over her house or could get pushed over by the hurricane. And if I didn't cut it down, she was going to sue me if it fell during the hurricane. And so I told her she was welcome to trim it. I was not going to be cutting that tree down. I wasn't going to be spending any money on that. And I did a little bit of research too. And, you know, if it's over her property line, she's kind of responsible for it, is what my amateur research suggested. So I got this property for sale, and it was up for quite a while. Every time somebody would call me and say, "Oh, I want to go look at the property," they would go look at it, and then I would never hear back from them. And so after a couple times, I started calling people back, and I would say, "Hey, did you look at the property?" "Yeah, we went and looked at it." And I was like, "Well, you know, what did you think?" And they're like, "Well, the neighbor told us." And every time somebody went out, it turned out the neighbor was going out and telling them all the reasons they didn't want to buy it. "Oh, it's in a flood zone. You can't build on it." They would make stuff up. "Oh, there's been, you know, all kinds of issues with this property and blah, blah, blah." But I dropped my price down a little bit. I think I started at 35. I dropped down to 30. So I had this guy call me and he's like, "I'm going to go look at the property." And I was like, "Look, before you go out there, I want to warn you. The neighbors don't want this property to sell. They just want to keep it vacant so they can have access to it, whatever. I don't know why, but they don't want a house back there." And he was like, "Well, I'm not building a house anyway, and I'm not worried about the neighbors. So it's good to know, but I don't care." He said, "I am a landscaper, and I buy properties and then I fix them up. I clear them out. I go in there with machines and clear everything out, make it look nice, and then I resell it." And I was like, okay, so this might be a good buyer for me. So he went out, he called me back, He told me he'd give me $27,000 for it. We agreed on it, signed the contract. He bought it from me. That was the end of it. Well, I'm looking at the property appraiser's website right now, and it's really interesting because sure enough, he did what he said he was going to do. This isn't the way I buy property. I buy property for cheap. I find the deal, and then I make my money on the deal. So then I resell it. So I bought that property for $9,800. I sold it for $27,000. This guy bought it for $27,000 in February, and he went in with machines and cleared it all out, relisted it, resold it for $45,000, and it was a 1 acre property, I believe. Yeah, 1.07 acres. He made $18,000 on it, and I made $17,000. He made $18,000. It's really a good option if you want to do that as well. If you know how to run a chainsaw and you don't mind putting in some sweat equity and you have some machines maybe to pull out stumps or do some stump grinding or whatever, land flipping is a great thing to do because I make good money when I flip a piece of land, but I don't do anything to it. You could buy land cheap and use that as your buying point when you're talking to the seller and say, look, there's going to be a lot of work that goes into this. I'm going to have to take out some trees, do this, that, and the other, clear the land if I want to resell it. And you know, property owners, they don't really know. They don't think about how much work that's going to be. But you can increase your profit margin if you're willing to do that. So you're going to want to check out my next video because the property in that video I bought cheap and then I sold it really fast to a builder, and I'm going to talk about how you do that.